Next, what we want to do is we want to remove this intermediate shaft right here, and it is held on by 3 bolts up here, and we'll get that out of the way. And then we need to get this engine to transmission stiffener bracket out of the way, and that is held on with 4 bolts up here and on the front right here, and then a couple right into the transmission. Before we can get this bracket off though, we have to undo the downpipe from the exhaust. We've got 3 13mm bolts right there and 2 10mm bolts right here. And then also with this exhaust, we will slide it off of the exhaust hangers right there. To break these downpipe nuts, what you want is you want a 13mm, an extension bar, and then a breaker bar. Break all 3 loose, and I also put some WD-40 on them, and then they'll come right off. And then for these 2 10mm, what you want to do is take your 10mm deep socket and then just gently tap it on to make sure it seats really well, because that's an easy bolt to round off. Okay, here I am with this engine to transmission bracket, and I loosened up all my 13mm bolts. And so getting that out of the way reveals this piece, which is called the inspection cover, and it is held on with 3 8mm bolts. So we'll remove that next. Alright, I got the 3 bolts out, so now what we'll do is just pull this inspection cover off of here. And now what we've got is we've got our flex plate, which is attached to our engine, and then these, I think they're 15mm bolts, are what attaches the flex plate to the torque converter, so we'll have to get those, but that'll come later. One thing I wanted to point out while I was here, take a look at what happened to this. This kid was spinning the tires on this car and blew the differential pin. Blows it right through the crankcase, and it bleeds out all the transmission fluid. So yeah, the car didn't just die on its own. I've got my intermediate shaft loose, and so all we're going to do is just pull it straight out and drop it out of the car. And now what we want to do is, we've got a couple more bolts in here. Right here, this is a 15mm. You want to loosen that, just break it loose. And then another 15 right here that we want to break loose. The reason we're breaking all these loose is because while the transmission is still in the car, it's still held pretty securely, and we can torque against it still. Alright, next what we want to do is we want to break these torque converter to flex plate bolts. This is a little bit of a challenge, because what you need to do is you need to position the bolt first of all, and the way you'll do that is you'll put your 21mm on your, and a breaker bar on the crank right here, and then you can move this back and forth to wherever you need it. And so also what you need is a 15mm 6-point, because you don't want to be rounding these bolts off at all. And so just set this on here, and you can grab a hold of this breaker bar that's on the crank and torque against this bolt right here to loosen it. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, I got the first bolt out, you can see it right there. And so now what I want to do is turn my crank bolt here until I position the next bolt in place. That looks pretty good right there. And so this is really a place where you can screw up pretty bad if you round off these bolts. So keep that in mind. This works pretty well with an assistant, but I don't have that right now, so I'm just taking great care to make sure my socket is properly seated on there and I've got some good leverage. We've got our flex plate to torque converter bolts all removed. Next, what I want to do is remove the vehicle speed sensor connection right there, and then I want to remove the steering rack bolts right here. These are 15s, and the bolt will just slide out the back. And got one more right here. And what we'll do is we'll disconnect the steering rack from the engine cradle here. Here we are at the driver's side, and what we want to do next is remove our shifter cable. And so you can see the shifter cable right here, and on this side all you want to do is stick your flathead in there and pry that connector off. And that's all that is. Next, we want to take the shifter cable out of where it's seated into the transmission housing. And to do that, we are going to use just a regular short flathead. We've got a couple little ears back there that we want to pry and work that shifter cable loose. Alright, I've loosened up the shifter cable. Now all I want to do is just slide it back out of its little seat and then out of the way back there. Now I want to remove the transmission mount, and so you've got two 10mm bolts right here, and then you've got a 15mm up from underneath. And so this is now where we need to start supporting the engine once we take out these two 10mm bolts right there and right there. And we'll need to support the engine with our floor jack from below. Next, what we want to do is remove this 10mm bolt right there that's holding this brake line on. Get this brake line out of the way, loosened up at least, so now it can kind of move out of the way a little bit. And then we've got a couple of 18mm bolts right here holding the subframe on, and you want to break those loose with your breaker bar, and then remove both driver's side. So there's one. The other one is up in here. Okay, so now what we've done is we have removed, or we have lowered the driver's side of the subframe. But check it out, our steering rack is loose. We're not going to mess with our connection between our steering wheel because that's a pain. And so now this whole thing is loose right here, and so what we want to do now is jack up our engine and transmission, get this mount out of here, and then we can remove our engine to transmission bolts. Now what we want to do is position our jack under the oil pan with the shop block in between, and we are just going to jack this engine up a little bit. Lift up the transmission. And what else you can do if you want to is you can put a board across here and put a strap around this thing and support the engine from above or below, it doesn't really matter. Alright, so what I've done now is I've removed all the bolts that are holding the transmission on, and so now it's just hanging basically there. And so what I want to do is go underneath the car and see if I can wiggle it loose and let it drop onto the engine cradle. And so what I've done also is I've lowered my engine back down I had to jack it up to remove the transmission mount, and now I lowered it back down, and so you can see I've got plenty of space over here to deal with, and so now I'm just going to go under the car and try and wiggle it loose. Back here at the driver's side, what I've done is I have lowered my engine cradle, and to do that I just stick a pry bar in here and pull it down, and then stick some kind of a wedge in between there so that that cradle will stay down. And now what I want to do is I just want to wrestle this transmission out of here, and it will fit, it will come out right through this driver's side wheel well. So let's give it a try. Okay, so here is our blown transmission, and it's out of the car. You can see what we're dealing with here, and so what we're going to do is, to get this transmission back into the car, we're going to wrestle it up onto this sway arm and control arm here. Once we get it in basically in the wheel well, then we'll bring the engine crane back over here, and we will use that, because this I've successfully manhandled a manual transmission into place, but I have not done an automatic yet. So I employ my engine crane, which is right there. So we'll get that all positioned.